Good evening, dear listener, and welcome back to the Drowzy Historian. As you settle into your quiet space tonight, perhaps soft light flickering across the room, allow your breathing to slow. The noise of the day begins to fade, the mind loosens its grip on the present, and in that slow uncoiling of thought, we can drift backward, beyond the hum of cities, beyond the pulse of modern life, back to a land where the desert itself seemed eternal. Picture, if you will, the Nile under a gentle dawn, mist rising from its surface, the river's wide arms gleaming gold in the first light. To the west, the desert stretches in pale silence, and in that silence, something vast begins to rise. Blocks of limestone gleaming like frozen sunlight, shaped by thousands of hands, guided by a vision older than any empire we know. The pyramids of Egypt stand not merely as monuments, but as an argument with time. They are stone answers to the oldest human question. How can what we love endure when we ourselves cannot? Every block, every angle, every long ramp of sand was a gesture toward eternity. And tonight, as we wander slowly through that story, we will trace both the human and the divine within it. The sweat of the builders and the dreams of the priests, the engineering of the living and the longing of the dead. The pyramids were not only tombs, they were prayers written in stone, a dialogue between life and the afterlife, between the dust of men and the permanence of the heavens. So let your thoughts soften, let your breathing deepen. We are about to drift into a time 4,500 years distant, when the Nile was the axis of the known world, and kings built mountains to speak with the gods. If this slow passage through history brings you calm, consider subscribing, so that whenever sleep calls you back to history's quiet corridors, you'll know where to return. Now, let us begin our descent. In the third dynasty of Egypt, around 2,700 years before Christ, a man named Imhotep stood before his king. The ruler's name was Djoser, a pharaoh whose power reached from the Delta to the Red Sea. But even that vast dominion could not conquer time. Djoser asked his architect for a tomb unlike any that had come before. Not a simple mastaba, the flat-topped tombs of earlier kings, but something that could rise toward the sky. Imhotep, priest, physician, and visionary, conceived an idea that would change the course of architecture forever. Instead of one low tomb, he imagined a series of them, stacked upward in steps, each layer climbing closer to heaven. The result was the step pyramid of Saqqara, the world's first great stone monument, the ancestor of all the pyramids to come. It rose 6 tiers above the desert, a ladder of eternity reaching toward the sun. Picture that landscape. The workers, thousands of them, hauling blocks of limestone through corridors of scaffolding. The air filled with the rhythm of chisels, the thud of sledges striking sand. And in the midst of it, priests reciting hymns to the sun god Ra, whose daily journey across the sky mirrored the soul's own path through death to rebirth. When Djoser's pyramid was completed, it stood as a statement. Stone could outlast flesh, order could triumph over decay, and a human vision could mirror the architecture of heaven. Egypt had discovered its language of immortality, a grammar of symmetry, precision, and permanence. Over the centuries that followed, this idea grew in ambition. Each new pharaoh sought to outdo the last. Stone by stone, dynasty by dynasty, Egypt's kings built ever greater monuments to their own divinity. But behind the grandeur lay a deeper belief, one that shaped every line of those vast silhouettes against the horizon, that the pharaoh was not merely a man, but a bridge between earth and the cosmos. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending, it was a crossing, a passage to the field of reeds, a paradise where the just would live again under the sun's eternal light. But to reach it, one needed a body preserved, a tomb protected, and a name remembered. The pyramid was therefore both fortress and vessel, a guarantee that the king's spirit, his Ka, would survive the journey. Each block was a prayer, each angle a calculation meant to align the pharaoh's tomb with the stars. For the ancient Egyptians, geometry was sacred. They saw harmony in numbers, divinity in proportion. When they built, they did not simply measure the earth, they mirrored the heavens. The Great Pyramid at Giza, for instance, is aligned within a fraction of a degree to true north. A feat so precise that even with modern tools, its accuracy astonishes. Its 4 sides face the cardinal points, its base nearly perfect, its proportions echoing mathematical constants that would not be recorded again for millennia. But what makes these monuments truly remarkable is not only the vision, but the hands that carried it out. Behind the pharaoh's eternal glory were tens of thousands of laborers, craftsmen, and farmers, whose lives were woven into the rhythm of the Nile. During the flood season, when their fields lay underwater, they were conscripted into royal service, hauling, carving, dragging stones that weighed more than oxen could bear. We often imagine these workers as slaves, but evidence tells a different story. Excavations near the pyramids have revealed workers' villages, with bakeries, breweries, and even small chapels. Graffiti on the walls speaks of camaraderie and pride. The drunkards of Menkaure, one crew called themselves. Another was the vigorous gang of Khufu. They sang, they feasted, they lived and died in the shadow of the stones they raised. Their graves lie near the monuments, suggesting honor, not servitude. Imagine their world. Dawn breaking over the desert, the scent of bread and beer drifting through camp, the sound of wooden sledges sliding across sand slickened with water. They worked in teams, pulling ropes to move blocks up long ramps of limestone dust. Each command echoed through the dry air. Heave, pull, rest, again. The sun scorched, but the work continued, day after day, year after year, until a mountain stood where none had been. These workers were not building simply for a king. In a sense, they were building for all humanity, giving shape to the idea that our lives can carve something permanent out of impermanence. Each block, each scarred hand, each weary step up the ramp was an offering to the concept of endurance itself. When we speak of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest ever built, we are speaking of nearly 2.3 million blocks, each weighing on average 2.5 tons, some more than 15. It rose to a height of 146 meters, taller than any structure humanity would build again for nearly 4,000 years. Beneath it lay chambers aligned with cosmic significance. The king's chamber, the queen's chamber, and passageways angled toward the stars. The Great Pyramid was not simply a tomb. It was a map of the heavens etched in stone. Scholars believe that its internal shafts pointed to key stars associated with rebirth. Orion, home of Osiris, god of the afterlife, and the northern circumpolar stars, the undying lights that never set. The pharaoh's soul, the texts say, would ascend along these passages to join them, eternal, imperishable, radiant. And yet, what draws us to these monuments is not only their perfection, but their persistence. They have stood through earthquakes, invasions, the rise and fall of empires. When the last mammoth still roamed the earth, the pyramids already watched the horizon. When Rome rose and fell, they were ancient. When Newton studied gravity, they had already defied it for 40 centuries. Their endurance is not simply architectural, it is emotional. To stand before them is to feel the full weight of human time, the centuries stacked like their stones. They remind us that even in the face of mortality, humanity has always reached upward. The desert winds have stripped the casing stones. The gold that once crowned the apex has long vanished, but the shape endures, perfect, patient, vast. And in that endurance, we glimpse our own longing to be remembered, to matter beyond our brief flicker of years. As we rest here, halfway between earth and eternity, the sands shift gently around us. The stars begin to fade. The workers' songs echo faintly through the ages. And somewhere, under the eternal weight of stone, a king still waits for the dawn. As the centuries passed, Egypt entered what we now call the Fourth Dynasty, a time when human ambition and divine faith reached their shared summit. The kings of this age, Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, ruled not only over the land of the Nile, but over the horizon itself. Their monuments at Giza were not just tombs, they were statements of cosmic order, reflections of Ma'at, the Egyptian principle of balance, truth, and eternal harmony. To the Egyptians, building was never only practical, it was sacred geometry, a way of inscribing the universe into stone. The pyramid was an image of the primeval mound that rose from the waters of creation, the first land to emerge when the sun god Ra brought light into being. To build one was to recreate the act of creation itself, to echo the moment when order triumphed over chaos. And so each pharaoh, upon ascending the throne, became not just ruler, but divine participant in this cosmic renewal. When Khufu ordered his pyramid at Giza, he was claiming not only power, but immortality, the right to stand among the gods. Around him, a nation responded. The site was chosen carefully, a plateau west of the Nile, where the sun set each evening in a blaze of gold. For Egyptians, the west was the land of the dead, where the sun descended into the underworld before rising again renewed. There, on that sacred horizon, men would labor for decades to give the king his doorway to eternity. Imagine the scene as work began. Surveyors kneel with ropes and plumb lines, measuring the desert with mathematical precision. The air hums with the heat of the sun. Architects, carrying reed pens and wooden tablets, mark the foundation with ink that will vanish in days, but guide the laying of stone that will last millennia. Barges glide along the Nile, stacked with limestone quarried from Tura across the river. Each block is unloaded, dragged up ramps, and positioned by teams who knew their craft better than any builders before them. The songs they sang were not of conquest, but of rhythm, call and response to keep the body's strength aligned with purpose. They built not with haste, but with ritual. When a new layer was completed, offerings were made: bread, beer, incense, and words to the gods. Every stone laid was a sacred act, every measured line a reflection of divine order. The pharaoh's name was carved into hidden chambers, his titles repeated in hieroglyphs that shimmered in the light of oil lamps. To modern eyes, the scale is almost incomprehensible. The base of Khufu's pyramid spans 13 acres, each side aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. Scholars debate how such precision was achieved. Some suggest the builders used the stars of Ursa Major to find true north, others, the shadow of the sun. However they did it, the result is flawless. A monument so exact that it deviates by less than the width of a human thumb across its vast length. And yet, what lies beneath may be even more remarkable. Deep inside, in chambers where no daylight has entered for 4,000 years, the builders shaped passages with joints so tight that even a knife blade could not slip between them. Above the king's chamber, a series of 5 great granite blocks form a relieving system to distribute weight, an engineering concept that would not be rediscovered until the Renaissance. These were not primitive builders. They were mathematicians, astronomers, artisans of astonishing insight. Still, even their brilliance served a purpose larger than reason: faith. The Egyptians saw no separation between science and religion, between measurement and prayer. For them, to build precisely was to honor the gods precisely. The pyramid was a machine for eternity, an engine of resurrection designed to ensure the pharaoh's rebirth among the stars. At night, when the desert cooled and the workers slept, the priests would ascend the scaffolding and speak to the heavens. They called upon the spirits of the sky, the imperishable stars that never set, to watch over the construction. These were the souls of past kings, eternal guardians shining forever in the northern sky. To join them was the ultimate goal of every ruler. As Khufu's pyramid neared completion, smaller pyramids rose nearby, one for his queen, another for his heir. Around them, a city of workers, priests, and officials flourished. Temples were built at the base, where rituals would continue long after the king's death. Causeways linked the river to the plateau, guiding the funeral procession that would one day carry the mummified body of the divine ruler from life to eternity. Picture that final journey. The sun low in the sky, the priests chanting hymns from the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings known to humanity. The coffin glides along the causeway, surrounded by incense and flowers, through the valley temple and up toward the rising pyramid. In those chants, the pharaoh is transformed from man to god. "You are not dead," the priests would whisper. "You have risen. You have ascended to the sky. You are among the imperishable stars." That belief gave purpose to every hammer strike, every wound in the hands of workers, every measure of stone. Without faith in eternity, such a task could never have been sustained. And yet, even eternity changes. After Khufu, his son Khafra built his own pyramid beside it, slightly smaller but still magnificent. To guard it, he ordered the carving of a lion's body with a human face, the Great Sphinx. Its gaze fixed eastward toward the rising sun, it embodied the union of king and cosmos, strength and wisdom. Even eroded by time, its presence still humbles. Menkaure followed, building the smallest of the 3 great pyramids, its lower courses sheathed in granite instead of limestone. A mark of refinement, not weakness. Together, the 3 formed a triad, a trinity of power, devotion, and ambition that would dominate the landscape for all eternity. When you stand before them today, the desert's silent. Except for the wind, you can almost feel the rhythm of that ancient labor, the echoes of commands in forgotten tongues, the rumble of stone, the distant singing of workers who believed they were shaping forever. But within a few generations, the grandeur began to fade. The next dynasties turned to smaller pyramids, their resources drained, their faith shifting. The great age of pyramid building would soon pass, leaving Giza as both triumph and tomb for an era of divine kingship. And yet, Egypt itself endured. The pyramids became sacred markers, centers of pilgrimage and wonder. Even as new gods rose and empires changed, these mountains of stone remained, a horizon that refused to die. Later pharaohs built temples instead of tombs, carving their devotion into cliffs and walls rather than stacking it toward the sky. The focus turned inward, toward the hidden and the mysterious. In the Valley of the Kings, tombs were cut into the rock, their secrets guarded by darkness rather than scale. But the pyramids remained visible, a memory in the landscape, the stone handwriting of a civilization that had tried to speak to eternity and, in some ways, succeeded. As centuries rolled into millennia, the sands crept upward, swallowing temples and cities. But the pyramids stood. They became landmarks for travelers, objects of awe for poets, puzzles for scholars, symbols for empires long gone. The Greeks called them wonders. The Arabs called them the al-ahram, the shining structures. The world simply called them eternal. In them, we see not only Egypt's past, but our own reflection, the need to make meaning from mortality, to leave behind a trace that will outlast the hand that made it. Every civilization builds its own pyramids, whether in stone, art, or memory. As night deepens, picture the desert under a canopy of stars. The wind slides over the limestone faces like a whisper. The Sphinx watches still. The three pyramids rise against the horizon, their angles catching the faint light of the moon. They do not speak, yet they say everything that needs to be said. That time passes, but meaning endures, and beneath them, in chambers sealed by dust and prayer, the kings of Egypt lie dreaming still, their names carried by the stars. For thousands of years after the age of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, the pyramids stood alone on their plateau, silent sentinels watching empires come and go. The desert swallowed the names of kings, the Nile shifted its course, and new dynasties rose along its banks. Yet these mountains of stone remained, immutable and patient, the bones of eternity laid bare under the Egyptian sun. As the old kingdom faded, so too did the divine authority of its rulers. The unity that had once bound Egypt fractured, and famine crept through the land. The people still looked upon the pyramids, but now they saw them not as bridges to the gods, but as relics of a golden age already lost. Time had begun its quiet conquest. By the Middle Kingdom, new kinds of tombs replaced the towering forms of Giza. The pyramids became symbols of a past too grand to repeat. The faith in the pharaoh as a living god waned, and the burden of immortality began to shift, from the few to the many. In the sacred texts of this era, every Egyptian soul could hope for eternal life, provided it lived in accordance with ma'at, truth, balance, and justice. The afterlife was no longer the privilege of kings. The architecture of eternity had moved inward, into the heart and the word, into prayers and the written name. But the old pyramids remained, still reaching skyward, monuments to a time when humanity believed the gods could be persuaded by geometry. Centuries later, when foreign dynasties ruled Egypt, Hyksos, Nubians, Persians, the pyramids became emblems of endurance. They had outlasted gods and kings alike. When Alexander the Great marched through Egypt, he stood before them as countless others had, awed into silence. The Greeks imagined them as temples of forgotten science, repositories of hidden wisdom. To them, Egypt was a land of mystery, and the pyramids its greatest riddle. In their stories, they said that within those stones lay the knowledge of the stars, the secrets of medicine and numbers, the wisdom of priests who had spoken with the sun. They imagined chambers filled with golden scrolls, corridors lined with prophecy. In truth, the pyramids contained little more than dust and sarcophagi, but the myth of secret wisdom endured longer than any treasure could have. When Rome came, its emperors sought legitimacy by claiming the favor of Egypt's gods. Travelers carved their names into the limestone of Giza, seeking a share of its immortality. And though the empire that ruled the world crumbled, the pyramids did not. They watched, unblinking, as centuries of human noise rose and fell around them. Then came the sands. The desert, indifferent and patient, crept forward grain by grain, swallowing the temples, the Sphinx, and even the memory of the old world. By the time of the early Islamic caliphates, the pyramids were already ancient beyond measure. Arab scholars wrote of them with reverence and curiosity. Some believed they were built before the flood by a prophet to preserve knowledge from destruction. Others claimed they were tombs of giants who had walked the earth before mankind. For all their theories, one truth remained. No one had forgotten them. When the great historian al-Masudi visited Giza in the 10th century, he described the pyramids as like mountains carved by the hand of God. He wrote of their impossible symmetry, their smooth faces gleaming in the sun, and the unfathomable labor that must have raised them. It is strange to think that, by then, the pyramids were already as old to al-Masudi as the Roman Empire is to us. They had survived 3,000 years of storms, conquest, and silence. They had watched as language itself changed, as gods were born and buried in the sands. And yet, even then, they were not done shaping the human imagination. For the pyramids are more than monuments, they are mirrors. Each age sees itself reflected in their stone. To the ancients, they were ladders to the heavens. To the Greeks, libraries of lost wisdom. To the Arabs, divine mysteries beyond human understanding. And to the modern world, they became puzzles of engineering. Proof of what humanity can achieve when belief becomes purpose. In the early 19th century, as Europe turned its gaze once again toward Egypt, explorers and scholars arrived with measuring rods, notebooks, and dreams of discovery. Napoleon's expedition in 1798 brought with it not just soldiers, but scientists, mathematicians, and artists. They mapped every angle, every shadow, every crack in the stone. Their wonder was as intense as that of the priests who once built it. Only now, the language of reverence was geometry and science. Napoleon himself stood before the Great Pyramid and, according to legend, said to his men, "Soldiers, from the top of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." It was both admiration and challenge, a reminder that the weight of history can both humble and inspire. Yet even with all their instruments, the explorers could not measure mystery. When the Great Pyramid was first opened in modern times, the world expected treasure, gold, jewels, mummies. Instead, they found an empty granite coffin in a chamber of silence, and perhaps that emptiness was the truest treasure of all. For in that silence lies the enduring paradox of the pyramids. Built as tombs, they have outlived everything that was meant to die within them. The kings they were built for are dust, their names eroded, their empires forgotten. But the tombs themselves endure. In building for eternity, those long-vanished hands achieved a kind of immortality beyond their own imagining. When we look upon them today, we stand not only before a marvel of engineering, but before a confession of faith, not in gods, but in endurance, in the human refusal to vanish without a trace. Every block still holds the echo of that defiance. We were here, we dreamed, we built, we reached for the stars. In the last light of day, as the sun sinks behind the Giza plateau, the stones burn with soft gold, the desert hums with silence. The Great Pyramid casts a shadow across the sands, long and deep, like the hand of history itself. It is the same shadow that has fallen for 45 centuries, over farmers, conquerors, scholars, and wanderers. It is the shadow of everything we have ever hoped to make eternal, and perhaps that is why we still stand before it in awe. Not because we understand it, but because at some level, we recognize ourselves in it. Fragile creatures building monuments to outlast time, knowing they never truly can. As the wind whispers through the cracks of the stones, you can almost imagine it speaking the names of those who raised them. Nameless men and women whose bones have long since returned to dust, but whose work still catches the sunlight every morning. They will never be remembered individually, but their hands shaped eternity. When the moon rises, the desert changes color. The limestone glows pale silver, the air cools, and silence thickens like water. In that stillness, the pyramids seem alive, not in movement, but in presence. They are no longer simply objects of study, but beings in their own right, patient and watching, older than our cities, older than our languages, still standing in conversation with the sky. Even now, astronomers find in their alignments the precision of a mind attuned to the heavens. Historians find in their structure the first blueprint for civilization, the organization of labor, of purpose, of belief. Psychologists find in their persistence the proof of humankind's ancient obsession with death and memory. The pyramids belong to all of these interpretations and to none. They are too vast, too old, too perfect to belong to one meaning alone. They stand beyond the reach of time, their purpose fulfilled and yet eternal, their silence deeper than any prayer. And as we gaze upon them, perhaps the question they whisper back to us is not how they were built, but why we still build at all. As night deepens over the Giza Plateau, the desert exhales a long, cool breath. The stars, those same ancient witnesses, return to their posts above the horizon. They glitter over the stone summits, just as they did when the first builders rested after their day's labor. When the priests whispered the hymns of resurrection, when the pharaohs believed that from these very points their souls would ascend into the heavens. The pyramids do not move, yet they change with every hour. Under sunlight they burn like bronze. Under the moon they glow like bone. They are the pulse of a civilization long buried but never silenced. For Egypt did not build the pyramids to celebrate death. It built them to remind the living that death was only a door. The Egyptians believed the soul had many parts: Ka, Ba, Ach. The Ka was the life force that needed nourishment after death. Hence the food offerings left in sealed chambers. The Ba was the personality, the spirit that could leave the tomb and travel, returning at night to rest in the preserved body. And the Ak, the luminous form, was the final transformation, the moment the soul joined the eternal stars. The pyramid was designed to protect and guide all these aspects of the self. It was geometry as theology, every angle, corridor, and chamber engineered to assist the spirit's journey from earth to heaven. What we see as stone, they saw as the architecture of rebirth. But time, indifferent to all our meanings, went on. Dynasties fell. The hieroglyphs faded. The great kings became names on broken stelae. And yet, through the silence of ages, their monuments endured. Even when Egypt itself was conquered again and again, by Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Ottomans, and beyond, these structures remained untouched, too sacred, too vast to destroy. And perhaps that endurance is the final message of the pyramids. That even when belief fades, the act of believing leaves a trace. The faith that shaped these stones may have passed, but the impulse behind it, to reach upward, to preserve, to defy oblivion, is universal. It is what links us to those ancient builders across 4.5 millennia. Imagine for a moment a single worker among the thousands, his name lost, his home perhaps a hut on the edge of the desert. He rises before dawn, eats bread baked from the grain of the Nile, drinks a small cup of beer, and walks out into the blinding light. His task that day is to haul a block up the ramp, one of hundreds he will move in his lifetime. He will never see the tomb completed, never stand before its shining face when the last stone is set. Yet his work will endure longer than any king's decree, longer than any empire's rule. His footprints will vanish, but his effort will become eternal. In that sense, the pyramids are as much monuments to the anonymous as to the divine. They remind us that greatness is rarely the act of one, but of many. That eternity is built, not declared. When later travellers stood before them, Herodotus, Strabo, Napoleon, and the modern scholars who mapped every stone, they felt the same quiet awe that has silenced countless generations before them. They looked up at these structures and understood something beyond architecture. That human time, for all its brevity, can leave marks that seem to touch the infinite. And yet, even stone is mortal in its own slow way. Wind and sand eat at the edges. Earthquakes shake their foundations. The polished white casing stones that once made them gleam like mirrors to the sun are gone, stripped for later cities. The pyramids too are fading, though at a pace almost imperceptible, a pace befitting eternity. Still, even in their erosion, they teach. They remind us that permanence is not perfection, but endurance. That what lasts is not what never changes, but what continues to exist even as it is changed. When the modern world discovered them anew through excavation, photography, and exploration, it was not simply curiosity that drew us, but recognition. We too are builders of memory. Our skyscrapers, our cathedrals, our libraries. They are the same impulse in another form, the wish to be seen, remembered, and understood. The pyramids whisper that it is possible, but only through devotion and unity of purpose, not through conquest. In the end, their message is quiet. The pharaohs thought they were building eternity for themselves, but in truth, they built it for everyone. Their own names have faded, their power dissolved. What remains is the human gesture. Hands lifting stone toward the sky. Hearts believing that meaning could be carved into matter. So as we leave this desert tonight, imagine the dawn returning. The first rays of sunlight creeping across the horizon, striking the apex of the Great Pyramid, just as they have every morning for 45 centuries. The limestone warms, the shadows shorten, and the desert awakens. Birds cross the river toward the fields, and the Nile gleams once more, carrying life between two worlds, the living and the eternal. The pyramids stand as they always have, patient and vast, reflections of the stars that once guided their making. They are the world's oldest conversation between man and heaven, and it has never truly ended. And now, as your own breath slows and the noise of your thoughts fades, you may rest in that silence, the same silence that has filled the desert for thousands of years. Let the weight of time feel lighter, knowing that every life, however brief, contributes its small stone to the architecture of the eternal. If these quiet hours have brought you peace, you are welcome to return, to drift again through the corridors of history and rest among the echoes of those who came before us. For now, close your eyes and let the sands settle. The stars above Egypt are still shining. The pyramids still stand, their shadows stretching through time itself. Good night from the Drowzy Historian.